about 15, and despite having done an academic degree, there was no choice for me, and I think being in the classroom has just reaffirmed that.
It is accepted in primary school education in England that there is one teacher teaching, we know, probably about 30 kids, with a range of abilities, all sorts of different children. One teacher teaches everything. Now, why is that?
It's a historical legacy. I mean, and it really began because it was the cheapest way to do it when there were very large classes and you had one teacher and maybe some monitors as well, some young students. And what's interesting, I think, so many of the things we're talking about, we're still stuck with the legacies of the past. Why don't we have specialist teachers, particularly at the top end of primary school?
We'll go back to the audience in a second, but Mick, you wanted to say something.
I'd like to blow this myth of having specialist teaching in the primary school, because my view is that if a teacher cannot teach 11-year-olds the national curriculum, then what on earth are they doing in the school in the first place? Now, I mean, I think that there is a case, Mike,
but even
I'd
foreign
agree with
languages.
you. Well, there is a case for possibly foreign languages and also music and possibly sport as well, which are our areas. But really, the curriculum, if you can't teach it to 11-year-old, what are you doing there? And
Sheila, go on. What do you say?
I must disagree. At the moment, the only qualifications you need to train to take a B.Ed are 2 GCSEs in maths and English. That's pretty low. Now, yes, in the Institute of Education and in other institutions, people will have A-levels. In fact, the Department of Education of Schools, Children and Families has admitted through the Teacher Development Agency that 25% of B.Ed trainees do not have A-levels at all. Now, I think that really means our primary teachers are not equipped to teach subjects to 10 and 11-year-olds, mathematics, I would say English, and this is why we end up doing biscuit dough with them all the time.
Hang on.
Well, some of the time. No, but I don't mean that. But I think it is very important to realise that in other countries, teachers are highly qualified and they're very focused. They're educated people who find it very hard to get a job. It's very competitive to become a teacher. Here we're going out, putting up adverts, inviting anybody who can to teach. And we are not insisting on the tough, rigorous standards academically of entry.
I think the issue of teacher quality is a really interesting one, and pay as well, because actually there was a very interesting report that came out recently from McKinsey which looked at all the best education systems in the world and said, what do they have in common? Looked at places like Finland, Hong Kong and Singapore. They were different in lots of different ways. Some had national curriculum, some didn't. Some had testing, some didn't. The one thing they had in common, they had teachers who had very high status, not necessarily highly paid. And high status was all about it being a difficult profession to get into in terms of needing really good qualifications, having some autonomy, in other words, being able to decide to some degree what they teach, and also very good internal training. So I think we need to look at those issues rather than necessarily just pay, although of course the teacher unions won't necessarily thank me for that.
OK, let's just hear from the audience. Anybody who perhaps hasn't already spoken? Yes, the lady in the pale blue top.
My name's Rosemary Kilbride and I'm a head teacher and I've been in education for a very long time, more than 30 years now. And when I came into this job, I would do it for nothing. I couldn't believe that I was being paid for something that I loved so much. And now I have to fight every day to get out of my office to see those children, to remind myself why I am doing the job. Because we're overcome with paperwork, or maybe it's not paperwork, now it's all coming through in the computer. But we still have to download it and we still have to pay for the paper and the print, but that's a different issue altogether. But it's about so-called experts telling real experts what they have to do and us proving that actually we know what we're doing if you let us alone for a little while. What really I feel now increasingly is that lots of children have to suffer while we get the evidence we need to say, told you it wouldn't work. And that's what my problem with primary education is at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, effectively, you're the equivalent of the Bobby who'd like to be on the beat, but you're back at the station and you're fiddling around with your paperwork.
Well, I think I'd rather... I'd like to try and stop having my strings pulled so much.
Yes.
Who is pulling them?
Who isn't pulling them?
Okay. Mick?
I couldn't agree with that more. I do recommend the delete button. And the paper bin worked for me when I was a head teacher. But it's not that, and it's not just the paperwork, but it's the compliance and the threat that comes with it. That if you don't do it, then somebody will say, "Oh, we'll take you off." And I agree with you absolutely. The job, it's a fantastic job. please let us get on with it. One of the shadow education spokespeople said, we want the state sector to be more like the private sector. Well, the private sector doesn't have an army of people telling them how to teach and telling them how to run their schools. And so if the state sector is going to be more like the private sector, let's take that on.
Any other comments?
People were really delighted when, in October last year, they got rid of the tests for 14-year-olds. But the tests for 11-year-olds have remained, and they've only remained in England. And now head teachers are thinking of boycotting them. And I wondered how much sympathy the panel had with the head teachers.
Thank you very much. John White.
There's great problems, I think, with the SATs. First of all, they're not good at assessing deeper levels of understanding. They're not good at assessing anything to do with these wider aims about how children are improving in their personal qualities, their moral development and things like that. If you think those sorts of things are important, then pencil and paper tests are not the answer to that. If you think that what's really important is that they should know how to spell deceive or receive, perhaps this is a good method. And the other thing is, of course, that they often cause children distress.
Sheila, am I right in thinking that you quite like the idea of simple pencil and paper tests?
I would not have this regular assessment throughout the whole and very bureaucratic assessment. I think there is a case for testing children in the penultimate year of primary school in English and mathematics. And these tests could be short, externally set tests, but internally marked. And they would be used really diagnostically to see where the child was, and if further work were needed in the last year of school, the child would be brought up to standard.
Mike, just remind us exactly where we are with testing.
There is a boycott being considered by the teacher unions. At the moment, the government is insisting on keeping the SATs at age 11. Testing is the most powerful weapon in education. The trouble is sometimes it's firing in the wrong direction. I mean, I can remember in primary school, they thought I needed glasses. I didn't need glasses. I didn't know my alphabet. So I couldn't read it. So you've got to be very careful, when you're doing a test, that you're looking for the right things. But if you just think there are at least 4 really key ones. One is to find out what the child can do and has learned. One is to check that the teachers are teaching the right things. That's really what they were brought in for. Another one is to compare school with school. And the fourth one is to see where we are on national standards. The problem is, with the current SATs, we try to do all of those things in one test.
Mick Brooks, just explain why your union wants to boycott SATs.
The tests not only narrow the curriculum, they actually have a shallow curriculum as well. And I think they tend to turn children off education, so by the time they get into the secondary sector, a lot of them have turned off. We're not against testing, but I think it's the use of testing to underpin, not undermine, teachers' expert assessment. And teachers assess their children all day, every day. Parents are very happy to have those assessments at the end of year 3, the end of year 4, the end of year 5, why not the end of year 6? We want to make sure that's externally moderated, and any testing, whether it's standardised testing or not, would underpin those results. At the moment, those results are used to vilify schools and draw up these results into league tables, which simply tell you where rich people live.
Steve, what about your own children's experience of SATs?
On a more general question, what does slightly worry me is that you are preparing children for a workplace that is ruthlessly competitive. I would slightly worry that without the experience of the stress of being tested, you are going to get such a shock when you leave school. I mean, maybe not at primary level, but schools have got to begin to prepare children for the
real world.
For the real world,
okay. Okay, let's just hear from the audience. The lady in the red jumper there.
My experience of